Welcome back to Things You Don't Know. I am here today with Dr. Deneen and Chandler Foster. And today we're talking about one of the strangest climate events in modern history. Not exactly real modern, but pretty modern. 1816. It's often called the year without a summer.
Ladies and gentlemen, that phrase sounds exaggerated, but in many places it was not far from the truth. In parts of North America and Europe, summer brought frost, cold rain, failed crops, food shortages, and social unrest.
And the surprising part is that the cause was not local. The crisis began with a volcano on the other side of the world.
Yes, indeed. In April 1815, Mount Tambora on the island of Sumbawa in what is now Indonesia, it erupted with enormous force.
It was one of the most powerful eruptions in recorded history. The eruption devastated nearby communities, but its effects did not stop there. Material from the eruption rose high into the atmosphere and spread around the globe.
So this is not just a volcano story. It is a climate story, a food story, a migration story, a government response story, and even a literature story.
Whoa, we're really going into a little deep dive here, aren't we?
Yes, we sure are.
We're going to look at what happened, how governments responded, whether hunger led to violence or military action, how people moved in response, and why this disaster is connected to Mary Shelley's Frankenstein.
And near the end, we will also briefly connect Tambora to recent volcanic activity. Over the last year or so, volcanic activity has been very visible in the news, but we have to be careful about what that does and does not mean.
Hey, how
Now,
about
let
you take us a little bit more into that Mount Tambora and the global climate shock, Dr. Deneen?
My pleasure, Dr. Weaver. Let's start with Tambora itself.
Okay.
On, a, on April 10th, 1815, Mount Tambora erupted with extraordinary violence.
Yeah, the local destruction was catastrophic. Villages were burned, ash spread over wide areas, and many people died either directly from the eruption or later from famine and disease.
But how does a volcano in Indonesia make people freeze in New England or Europe?
That's the central question, Chandler. A major eruption can send sulfur compounds and fine particles into the stratosphere. Once they are high enough, they can spread widely and reflect the sunlight away from the Earth.
Aha, key phrase. Reflect the sunlight away from the earth. Another key phrase. Stratosphere is pretty high up in the atmosphere. Yes. So the result is temporary global cooling. It does not mean the whole planet becomes frozen, but even a small average temperature change can cause severe damage if it comes at the wrong time, especially.
Oh, you mean wrong times, Dr. Weaver, like planting season or harvest season.
No, Chandler, that is correct. Agriculture depends on timing. Seeds have to go into the ground at the right time. Plants need warmth, sunlight, and predictable rainfall. Animals need fodder. Families need enough stored food to get through winter.
And Tambor disrupted that system. In 1816, many regions had cold temperatures, heavy rain, even an early version of acid rain, late frosts, and very poor growing conditions.
And people at the time, They really didn't fully understand why all this was happening.
No, they didn't. People saw the weather change, but the scientific connection between volcanic aerosols and the global climate was not understood the way it is today.
Yeah, to people living through it, the crisis may and probably did seem pretty mysterious, frightening, and in some cases, even supernatural.
Now, I want to get into the summer that felt like winter here, Dr. Weaver.
Okay.
Now, what did the year without a summer actually look like for ordinary people?
It must have been terrifying. In parts of New England, there were frosts in June. Some areas reported snow or sleet during what should have been the late spring and early summer warm weather. Crops were damaged or entirely destroyed.
Yeah. In Europe, the problem was often cold, wet weather. Grain harvests suffered, fields flooded, hay became scarce, livestock became much harder to feed, right, Chandler?
That's exactly right. And Dr. Weaver, it wasn't the same everywhere, but the results were very similar. Less food and higher prices.
You're right on there, Chandler, exactly. Food shortages are rarely just one event. One failed crop is certainly bad, but one failed crop after war, poverty, weak transportation systems, limited technology, and limited government relief can become an international disaster.
Yeah, Europe had just come through the Napoleonic Wars. Many communities were already quite strained. When food prices rise, like it is today, huh, Chandler?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, well, when that happens, the pressure on poor families or the middle class, it becomes severe.
And like you said, Dr. Weaver, very much so what is happening today. And in the United States, especially in New England, many farmers were already working land that was difficult to farm.
That's a very important point, Chandler. Rocky soil, short growing seasons, and limited reserves meant that a bad year could force very hard choices. Very briefly, Dr. Weaver, you mentioned the Napoleonic Wars. That's basically 25 years of European chaos coming out of the French Revolution that had just ended.
For some families, 1816 made staying where they were feel impossible. When crops failed, the effects moved through society very quickly. People sometimes think of food shortage as simply, oh, there's less food, but there's a lot more to it. It changes everything.
It certainly does. Grain prices rise, bread becomes more expensive. Poor families spend more of their limited income just trying to eat and stay alive. Animals may be slaughtered early because there is not enough fodder to keep them alive.
And once families lose livestock, they lose more than food, they lose labor, transportation, milk, wool, manure for fields, and their future security.
And see, another dire thing here is there's a carryover. This food crisis can carry over and damage the next year too.
Oh, yeah, it can set off a whole chain reaction of things.
In some regions, people protested the high prices. Food riots occurred in parts of Europe. In other places, people relied on their churches, charities, basic poor relief, Oliver Twist's workhouse, neighbors, or local officials.
Now, was this famine everywhere, Dr. Deneen?
No, we should be careful with that word. Conditions varied by region, but there were serious shortages, hunger, and localized famine condition in several places.
And even where people did not starve, they often lived with fear, uncertainty, debt, and loss.
Now let's talk about governments now. This raises a really big and critical question here. Did governments do anything to help people?
Yes, but very unevenly. This is at least 100 years before the modern welfare state. Governments did not have the same emergency systems, transportation networks, or social support programs that we expect today.
Yeah, relief often came from a mix of local governments, local churches, local charities, and poor law systems, and some emergency action also.
Now, some authorities tried to import grain, discourage exports, do price controls to keep prices down, or fund public works so people could earn wages.
So instead of just giving food, they sometimes tried to give people work.
Well, yeah, public works could provide wages while also building roads, improving infrastructure, or maintaining order.
Some towns distributed food directly or subsidized bread. Others opened granaries or organized soup relief.
But help depended on where you lived.
Very much so. A town with stored grain, some degree of money, and functioning institutions could do more than a poor rural district.
Yeah, that is one reason the year without a summer matters historically. It showed that food crises are not only private tragedies, they are public problems.
And 1816 did not create the modern welfare state, did it, Dr. Deneen?
No, that would be too simple. But that period does belong to the longer history of governments slowly, if only in their own survival, becoming more involved in food security, poverty relief, public health, and disaster response programs.
It was not a single founding moment by any means. It was one more warning light that when harvests fail, governments cannot simply stand aside and say, oh, well.
You know, as long as we're talking about the government, Dr. Weaver, that brings another question into my mind. Did hunger lead to military action?
I knew that one was coming. So let's see what Dr. Deneen has to say about that, huh?
Let's do that.
Not in the sense Tambora crisis caused a major international war. There was no large war launched because of the year without a summer.
Probably because they didn't have enough food to feed armies.
I think you're right.
Yeah, I do too.
But hunger did contribute to unrest, riots, repression, and military style responses inside of particular states, not just talking about in the United States, but states worldwide.
So soldiers were not fighting a volcano war, but they might be used to control hungry crowds.
That's a good way to put it, Channer. In several places, mostly in Western Europe, authorities used the police, militia, or soldiers to protect grain stores, control protests, stop looting, and enforce order.
Food shortages often produce internal instability before they produce war. People protest prices, smuggling increases, migration rises, governments fear disorder.
And remember, folks, Europe had come out of 2.5 decades of war. Governments are very nervous, and a crowd demanding bread could not only be seen as desperate people, but a real political threat.
And that makes the crisis more complicated. Hunger becomes a security issue. Food insecurity is never only about food. It becomes about legitimacy, trust, labor, disease, and survival.
In the United States, one major result was migration.
Especially from New England.
Yippers.
Yes, some families moved westward into places like western New York, Ohio, Indiana, what will become Michigan, and beyond.
Yeah, there were already reasons to move west: land availability, economic opportunity, and the hope of better farming. But the terrible weather of 1816 added urgency. What you got to do here, folks, is visualize. People didn't know why this was happening. Just suddenly we have winter in summer, right?
That's quite right, Dr. Weaver. And if you're already in a bad way as it stands, and if your farm barely works in normal years, and then the summer freezes your crops, then moving starts to look less like an adventure and more like survival.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
That's why historians often treat the year without a summer not just as a weather event, but as a demographic event. It helps push people to relocate all over the world.
Now, of course, westward movement also had consequences for native peoples already living on those lands.
Oh, yeah. If you were a European settler, you could just push them off, right?
That's
Hmm.
very important to say. Migration stories are often told from the perspective of the settlers moving west, but those movements certainly increased pressure on the native nations on land claims and existing communities. See our Native American podcast to learn more about that.
So, what you gentlemen are saying is the year without a summer is connected to settlement, displacement, and expansion, as well as climate. Let's kind of take a little detour that you're not going to expect. Let's talk about what did it do with literature? Huh?
Yes, let's do that. Now we're going to get to the part that many people have heard about. Bum, 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 Frankenstein.
Yeah, but I bet you they didn't know the real story behind it, Chandler.
No, sir, I did not, but it's quite interesting, isn't it?
It
Yeah.
sure is. In 1816, Mary Godwin, later Mary Shelley, was living near Lake Geneva in Switzerland with Percy Bysshe Shelley, her soon to be husband. Their two friends, Lord Byron, were nearby at Villa Diodati, and the famous writer John Polidori was also part of the circle. He was living in the next villa over.
Yeah, because the weather was so cold and wet. The group spent a great deal of time indoors, gathered around the fireplace.
And then came the ghost story challenge.
Oh, yes.
Yes, Byron suggested that each person write a ghost story. It was an informal literary challenge, a contest among friends, among intellectual people who were already interested in science, philosophy, the supernatural, and the limits of human knowledge.
As well as literature. Mary Shelley developed the idea that became Frankenstein, or the modern Prometheus, as it was known.
And Polidori wrote The Vampire, which helped shape later vampire fiction.
Hmm.
That's correct. So the gathering helped influence two genres, both science fiction and vampire literature.
Yeah, it would be too simple to say bad weather created Frankenstein. We're not really saying that. Mary Shelley's intelligence, reading, life experience, and imagination mattered far more than a rainy summer, that's for sure.
But the weather did create the setting, though.
Yeah, you're really right in saying that. More time indoors, more conversation, a darker atmosphere, a world already feeling unsafe and unstable.
And Frankenstein becomes one of the most important works ever written about creation and responsibility, ambition, playing God, and unintended consequences.
So, a volcano in Indonesia helped shape the literary gathering in Switzerland. Now, that's something to think about there, folks.
It really is. You know, it's one of the remarkable parts of this story. Climate disruption can leave traces in places and things we simply did not expect.
If we move past the famous headline, several lasting effects stand out, folks.
Oh, what might they be? Well, the first crisis exposed food vulnerability. Societies depended on stable seasons, grain supplies, transport, storage, and relief systems.
Oh, yes, and when those systems failed, people suffered, and they suffered greatly, and they suffered very quickly, too.
Second, this crisis reinforced the importance of government and community response. Relief did not become modern overnight, but the need for public action became harder to ignore.
Okay, and the third thing, the crisis encouraged migration. People moved because the climate and agriculture pushed them.
And fourth, it helped shape culture through Frankenstein and the vampire.
The final factor, the fifth factor, the Tambora eruption becomes part of the scientific history of understanding how volcanoes affect the climate.
Yet today, we know that large eruptions can affect temperature and rainfall patterns far from the eruption itself.
And that makes 1816 useful as a case study. It shows how one natural event can disturb food, government, migration, literature, and science.
It's a reminder, my friends, that history is rarely one thing at a time.
I want to talk about recent activity now. Dr. Weaver, you mentioned recent volcanic activity. Now, over the past year or so, it does feel like volcanoes have been in the news quite a lot.
Well, they really have. There's been very visible activity and unrest in several places. Recent reports have included activity at volcanoes in Indonesia, Japan, Papua New Guinea, the Philippines, Hawaii, Guatemala, Vanuatu, and other regions.
But we need to be precise. More visible is not the same as increasing globally.
That's right, Dr. Deneen. So, are there actually more eruptions, or are we just hearing about them more? I feel like it's the latter, but
Yeah,
what do you think?
the best answer, as far as I can see, is cautious. The Smithsonian Global Volcanism Program has stated that it does not see clear evidence that volcanic activity is truly increasing worldwide, just becoming more visible.
And I also think that they're happening in places that affect or potentially affect more people. And that is another aspect of it. But modern monitoring is a whole lot better than it used to be. Satellites, seismic instruments, webcams, aviation warnings, social media, and international reporting all make eruptions easier to detect and publicize.
So, basically, people may feel like volcanoes are suddenly more active because they can watch them now almost in real time. And I think that's very amazing how we can do that
It,
nowadays.
it certainly is, Channer. That said, there have been important and hazardous eruptions and unrest recently. These events matter greatly for local communities, aviation, agriculture, and public safety.
The key lesson here is balance. We should take recent volcanic hazards seriously, but we should not jump to the conclusion that Earth as a whole is entering some unusual volcanic age. We'll have to wait and see.
Yes, we will. And Tambora reminds us why careful monitoring matters. Most eruptions do not change global climate, but the rare, very large eruption can have consequences far beyond the volcano. And Dr. Weaver, I just would briefly like to say, while we were talking about this, you were talking about that this particular eruption
Mhm.
goes through almost almost at the top of Virginia, all the way across the continent, all the way through Canada, and all like around the world.
Yeah, it's quite amazing, isn't it?
Yes, and that's pretty considerable amount of distance for an eruption.
Tambora also gives us a way to think about modern vulnerability.
Yeah, today food systems are more advanced than they were in 1816, for sure. We have refrigeration, railroads, trucks, aircraft, global trade, weather satellites, crop science, and emergency relief agencies.
And we're safer, right, Dr. Weaver?
Well, in many ways, yes, but modern systems are also highly interconnected. A shock in one region can affect food prices, insurance, shipping, migration, and politics globally.
A modern eruption the size of Tambora would not simply be a local disaster. It would affect, as you said, Dr. Weaver, climate, aviation, worldwide crop supply chains, and international markets.
So the world is stronger in some ways and more fragile in other ways.
Yeah, that's probably a fair summary.
The 1991 eruption of Mount Pinatubo in the Philippines is a modern example of a major eruption affecting the global climate but for a limited period. It did not produce another year without a summer like 1816, but it confirmed the basic mechanism. Large eruptions can send material into the atmosphere and cool the planet temporarily.
And I was talking with somebody just today, as a matter of fact, who was in the Philippines, and they were saying, oh, yes, we're having a terrible time here with, and volcanic eruption was part of it. It just not the massive kind, but enough to disrupt things there.
That helps scientists understand what happens after Tambora.
Yep, Pinatubo was much better observed, so it helped scientists test climate models and understand volcanic aerosols. What do I mean by volcanic aerosols? I mean the stuff that is put up into the air in the atmosphere that we will eventually breathe.
Now, Tambora was not well understood at the time, as we said. Pinatubo was studied with modern instruments. Together, they can help explain how volcanic eruptions can affect the climate.
Yeah. So, the year without a summer still matters, but it's because it connects climate, agriculture, migration, government, public order, and culture.
And it shows that even a temporary climate shift can have major, significant consequences.
Especially when people are already vulnerable. Europe had just endured years of war. Many rural families lived close to subsistence anyway. Transportation systems were limited. Relief systems were absent or uneven at best.
Yeah, that when you have transport problems, you can't get the food and other supplies across those barriers. So Tambora did not create every problem of 1816, but it exposed weaknesses that were already there.
I kind of would like to use the expression here, adding fuel to the fire, Dr. Weaver.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because to me, it sounds like a stress test.
I guess so. It was kind of a stress test. Some institutions responded, some failed. Some people suffered because the systems around them were not prepared.
That's very true, and yet the story also adapted. Migration, relief efforts such as there were, scientific inquiry, and cultural works that lasted far beyond the crisis.
Including one of the most famous novels ever written.
Frankenstein. Exactly.
So let's summarize here. What happened in 1816?
Well, a volcano erupted in Indonesia,
Yeah, material from that eruption spread high into the atmosphere and helped cool the climate.
And the result was strange weather, crop failures, hunger, rising food prices, migration, unrest, and pressure on governments all over the world to respond.
and it also helped create the setting for Mary Shelley's Frankenstein and Polidori's The Vampire.
And it gave later scientists a powerful example of how volcanoes can influence climate.
The year without a summer was not just a bad season, it was a global warning.
Yes, it was a reminder that human societies depend on stable weather more than we sometimes realize.
And a reminder that natural events can reshape history in ways that cross continents, economies, governments, and even literature.
I hope you've learned something, folks. We could keep talking for another hour, but we've covered the main points. So that's it for this episode of Things You Don't Know. On behalf of Chandler and Dr. Weaver, thank you all.
Yes, and we hope you enjoyed this, and thank you for listening.
Yep. Please come on back. We have some other really interesting information for you. Bye for now.